Welcome to the Prophetic Connection. In this first exciting episode, we're going to find out what Jesus had to say about the prophetic future of the holy city, Jerusalem. To find out more, stay tuned. This place, the Mount of Olives. Fulfilling the prophecy, waiting for the day when the Messiah. I'm walking among the ruins at the southern end of the Temple Mount. In the times of Jesus, the great temple stood on the platform above. It was the end of the journey for Jewish pilgrims coming to this holy city from all over the land of Israel and, in fact, from beyond Israel's borders. This was the focal point of Judaism. They would come to worship in God's holy house in the great temple that stood on the Temple Mount. Jesus was brought here as an infant and dedicated to the glory of God in the tradition of Jewish parents down through history. We find him here again at the age of 12, but this time discussing the things of God with the knowledgeable men, the scholars, the rabbis, and others who were astonished at his knowledge. For the Jewish people, this was the end of their pilgrimage. This is where they came, families, community groups, long journeys to get to this place. But what was it about the temple that drew them here? And what did they find once they arrived here?
The Temple Mount is a controversial and prominent feature in the modern cityscape of Jerusalem. These ancient ruins of the temple, built by Herod the Great for the Jewish people 2,000 years ago, stand witness to events that have changed and shaped our modern world. This ancient temple existed during the time of Jesus. These remains remind us of the Jewishness of the Messiah. Today, many believe we can still learn more about Jesus and his life by studying what is left from the temple of his time.
The period of time that we're talking about in terms of the context of Jesus is 1st century Jerusalem, which is Roman-occupied Jerusalem after the death of King Herod, which means by that time the city has reached, not spiritually, but in physically, its largest size. The actual size of the old city that Herod did massive amount of reconstruction and is significantly bigger than the city walls of today, which are Ottoman Turkish walls from the 16th century. They went all the way up to the Russian compounds and all the way down to David's city and the Kidron Valley, much, much larger city. But most impressive was, of course, what's behind me. What the Western Wall is a remnant of is our piece of retaining wall built by Herod the Great, because he really remodeled what's called the Second Temple, because there's two temples that stood for 840 years there. The second one was built by the Jews who returned from the Babylonian exile. And then in the latter part of the 1st century before the Common Era, the Roman puppet king Herod, who was not a descendant of King David, he was actually from converts, Edomite and Nabatean converts, embarked on a massive building project, probably to ingratiate himself with his subjects who didn't like him very much, to say the least. But he will expand the platform back here to the largest size. It's still today the largest structure ever built in the land of Israel. And this platform is the largest platform ever built on the planet Earth. It's a trapezoid, 500 meters, which runs, if you look at the minarets in back of me, 1, 2, and 3, that's 500 meters long, which is over 500 yards by 300 meters. It encompasses the entire top of Mount Moriah, and you can put 24 football fields up there. It is huge. In the center where the gold dome stood was the actual temple. And if we're standing on the site 2,000 years ago, you would actually see a much deeper valley here. None of the houses below to the left of the Western Wall would be there. You just see this incredible long, over 500 yard long, massively high, up to 10 stories high down over here, very high wall, running, encompassing the entire upper part of the hill with this huge platform on top and this beautiful, beautiful temple that Herod reconstructed, which, by the way, was significantly taller than the top of the gold dome that you see today over here. And the rabbis of that period of time, who didn't even like Herod, to say the least, they still said, if you haven't seen the house of Herod, you haven't seen a house. And again, when it was completed, it was the largest structure ever built in the land of Israel, and it was the largest functioning religious site on the planet Earth at the time.
The Jewish temple in Jerusalem is mentioned hundreds of times in the Bible. At the time of Jesus, the temple would have been one of the world's grandest tourist attractions. Jesus and his family would have made their pilgrimage from the Galilee to the temple in Jerusalem several times.
For 1,000 years, the temple, Jewish temple, stood in Jerusalem, on the site today known as Temple Mount. We're standing now just opposite the southwestern corner of the Temple Mount. A pilgrim going up to the temple would first need to purify, sacrifice, and then ascend to Temple Mount. And in this corner, we can see how the pilgrim, the average citizen of Jerusalem, came in contact with the Holy Temple. Ascension to the temple demanded ritual purity, and look what they found here. This is a ritual bath. In Hebrew, a mikvah. Down here would be a body of collected water from rain, and people would come down these steps and immerse themselves in the water. What's so interesting about this particular mikvah, ritual bath, is this divider we see here. You see, this was for the public. Lots of people could come down here, immerse themselves in the water here, and then ascend, but they wouldn't want to touch the people coming down. They're impure, and they would prepare themselves to go pure into the temple. Now today, all that's left of Herod's grand building is the outside platform. But coming here, we're able to get a little bit of a closer look to this magnificent building. Come take a look over here, where they found these rocks, these stones that were toppled over by the Roman soldiers. Every stone that was above ground level was tossed down here to the street below. Now over here, we can see one of the details of the decorative masonry that we find on the temple compound. This shows us that there was a decorative column in the rock on the top of the temple. Here we can see another stone, which was probably used as like the guardrail of a balcony that people could stand up all the way on the top and look out over the city of Jerusalem. It's here we get a taste of the amazing building that's here, but it's also where we get the very tragic image of what happened here at the temple's destruction. The Roman soldiers would have come to the top, and after burning the temple and destroying it, would have tossed these stones down, smashing the street below, and basically saying this temple is not going to be rebuilt, not at least in the near future. One of the most amazing stones that was found is this one over here. You see, this stone here, you can see the line, was the cornerstone, all the way up on the top of the corner, the southwestern corner of the temple. Not only do we find the corner, we know it was a balcony where you could stand, you could even see the corner of that over here, but that's not all. They also found an inscription in Hebrew, which reads, Leveit hatkiah leha. Yeah, it was cut off right here. So we don't know exactly what it says, but we can use the rabbinic sources in Josephus to fill in the picture of what this inscription says, because this describes that it was a place of trumpet blowing, or blowing of the shofar. Now, what blowing of the shofar was conducted here? This, the southwestern corner, was the closest corner to the population of the city, and therefore this was to either to declare lehachriz, or lehavdil ben kodesh lechol, to separate between the Sabbath and the rest of the week. For it was here where one of the priests or one of the Levites would take the trumpets on Sabbath Eve, on Friday evening, and would blow. He would blow 3 times. The first blow, and the people would come in from their fields. The second blowing of the trumpets, people would close up their shops. And the third blowing of the trumpets, the Sabbath is about to begin. Now we're ready to enter the temple, going in through the gates. Right over here in the southern wall of Temple Mount, we see that many of the stones have been replaced. The Herodian masonry has been replaced with smaller, less impressive stones after this wall has been destroyed over the course of years by conquerors and by earthquakes. But if we look over here, we can see that this course of stones is massive. It's a double course of stones. And this delineates where once stood the floor level of the gates. Here and here we can see where the original Herodian masonry along this course show us where the original gates once stood.
Today, visiting the site of the temple, we wonder what Jesus and his followers would have seen when they entered the temple. Who served in the temple? What happened inside this magnificent structure 2,000 years ago?
Actually serving up on the temple at the time it stood, first and second temple period, were two groups of people. One were Kohanim and one were Leviim. Kohanim are a subgroup of Levites. Moses is from a Levite family. His brother Aaron was first anointed by God to minister in the tabernacle of the Mishkan. And when it became a temple, the descendants of that family continued to work in different groups. They would come up, there were a lot of Kohanim, they would come up for a certain number of weeks and do shifts in the temple. And their job was to oversee the animal sacrifices and the whole running of the temple. And the Levites also served a more custodial function. In addition, by the way, they played music up there, and they were sort of like the caretakers of the Temple Mount. So the Kohanim and Levites were constantly busy there with everything that went on in the temple. And at certain times of the year, especially on the pilgrimage holidays, which in Hebrew is called Olei HaRegel, which would be Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, the Passover holiday, Shavuos, and Sukkot holidays, all the Jews in the land of Israel would be coming up to Jerusalem to visit the temple and to partake in various sacrifices, especially during Passover. So you'd have massive thousands and thousands and thousands of people pouring onto the Temple Mount. It was a very hectic day, but this was constantly going on. And again, there was cycles, and different times of the day was busier than others, and different days of the week and different times of the year. But this will keep going on all the way through to the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70. The one difference, however, and this is even reflected in somewhat in the Christian Bible, is the priesthood. The highest ranking priest was called the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. And this was a very prestigious position to have, a direct descendant of Aaron's family, obviously. And unfortunately, in the Second Temple period, beginning with the Greek occupation of Israel, that position is going to become corrupted. And by the time you get to the Greek Empire and the Romans, they would buy and sell that office on a yearly basis. And this is reflected in Jewish writings, in the Mishnah, and even in the Christian Bible, much of the corruption that was going on within the priesthood itself, where you even had at some periods of time people who had no right to be priests at all, who were complete ignoramuses, were buying the office to get the honor of serving in the temple. So unfortunately, while the building itself was a gloriously beautiful building, the level of spirituality was considerably lower than the First Temple period, and there was a lot of things going on up there were viewed by the rabbis at the time, and again, it's even reflected in the Christian Bible as being not in keeping with the spirit of what Jerusalem or the temple is supposed to be about.
The corruption of temple leaders drove groups and individuals away from Jerusalem and into the wilderness. One such group set up their community in the desert outside of Jerusalem, on the western shores of the Dead Sea. This community was known as Qumran. The inhabitants of Qumran strove for a higher level of spirituality, far from Jerusalem's corruption. They are most popular for their scribal workmanship, known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. John the Baptist was yet another individual who challenged the corrupt leadership in Jerusalem. Rather than utilizing the ritual baths around the temple precincts, he immersed his followers in the Jordan River, calling for true repentance and righteousness. But how did Jesus respond to the magnificence of the temple? How did he react to Jerusalem's devastating spiritual condition? And what did he see when he looked into her not-so-distant future?
I'm walking by the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. In the time of Jesus, on top of the Temple Mount stood the great temple, first of Solomon, 1,000 years before Christ, and then in the time of Christ, the temple that had been refurbished by Herod the Great, and who added colonnades. And this was a magnificent structure on this 20-acre site above. But I want you to think of this site in the time of Jesus. The ruins that we have here reflect how busy this place was as the focal point of Jewish life. The merchants down below, the money changers, those that were the sellers of doves and sheep for the ritual sacrifices that took place in the temple. Down here there are ritual baths because the pilgrims coming to Jerusalem had to cleanse themselves according to the law of Moses before they could ascend up onto the holy ground on the Temple Mount above. So Jesus was here many times. He taught in the temple precincts, but he also wept over this holy place, this holy city. The end of Matthew chapter 23, verse 37, the words of Jesus, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." You see, Jerusalem missed the day of her visitation. He was the Messiah. He had come for his people, but they, for the most part, rejected him and his teaching. And then he said to them, "See, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more, till you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Well, they had said that on Palm Sunday when they rode the donkey from Bethany over the Mount of Olives, down through the Qumran Valley and up through the eastern gate into the temple precincts. They had said, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." But within a matter of days, their mood changed, and they were crying, "Crucify him, crucify him." And Jesus wept because they didn't understand who he was, much less the day of God's visitation to them. And as we continue to read in Matthew chapter 24, it says that Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. Every Jewish person was impressed. When they came to Jerusalem and they saw the temple and its colonnades, they had to be impressed. It was one of the wonders of the ancient world. And so Jesus' disciples likewise were impressed, as if to say to him, "Isn't this a magnificent structure?" His answer astonished them. They were shocked by what he said. He said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." In the distance behind me, stones piled up one upon another. But they're not from down here, they're from up there on the top of the Temple Mount. They were either part of the colonnades or the temple itself. And in AD 70, when the Roman armies laid siege to Jerusalem and destroyed the temple and killed hundreds of thousands of Jewish people within its walls, among the destructive things they did, they destroyed the temple. They left not one stone standing upon another, and they seemingly threw them off and down into the area round about the Temple Mount. Jesus predicted that that would happen. But he had many other things to say. He said in verse 20 of Luke 21, "But when you shall see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near." Jesus predicted what the Romans did. He saw it through his prophetic vision, and in fact, he warned Jerusalem of that destructive day. But still, the people would not listen, because this is a city that rejected the prophets and those that God sent unto her. And here is what he said specifically: "Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her," meaning Jerusalem, "depart. And let not those who are in the country enter her," meaning these are urgent times. And the place to be is not in Jerusalem, but away from Jerusalem, safety will be found. And he even added this: "But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people." How sad. This people were his people. He was a Jew, he was of them. And yet he prophesies the suffering that's coming in their future. Verse 24 of Luke 21, "And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." So not only was Jerusalem destroyed in AD 70, not only were hundreds of thousands of Jewish citizens killed in her streets, but the Jews were scattered to the winds among the nations of the earth. And thus began their long wandering in places they really didn't belong, and they were different because of who they were and whose they were. Lost, separated from their biblical, ethnic homeland, the promised land, the land of promise. But Jesus said that would last until the times of the Gentiles were fulfilled. Now, some say the times of the Gentiles ended in 1967, the Jews having become a nation again in 1948 with the rebirth of Israel, and then in 1967 capturing for the first time, where I'm standing, the ancient holy city of Jerusalem with the Western Wailing Wall where they can pray, and of course the temple precinct, what's left of it, above. And some say the times of the Gentiles ended then in 1967. The problem is there are two mosques of Islam still standing on the Temple Mount. Gentile mosques, symbols of the Gentiles. So in that sense, the times of the Gentiles continue as before. And there will be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars and on the earth, distress of nations. In the 21st century, the nations today are very distressed. There is high unemployment, economic challenges that the world seemingly can't resolve. The sea and the waves roaring. We have seen tsunamis with incredible loss of life and devastation of property. Men's hearts filling them from fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then this tremendous hope given in the words of Jesus. Then will they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now when these things begin to happen, these awful things that are happening on the earth, the nations with perplexity, but Jesus said that's not the end of the story. They're the signs that point to my return. They are in fact a means of hope. Now when these things begin to happen, look up, lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near. Meaning the culmination of all things, the coming of the Messiah, the Lord and Savior of mankind, is coming back. And then he spoke to them a parable, Luke 21, verse 29. Look at the fig tree. Now the fig tree is one of the symbols of Israel. But he said more than that. He said, look at the fig tree and all the trees. So there's a broader lesson here. When they are already budding, you see and know for yourselves that summer is now near. So you also, when you see these things happening, know that the kingdom of God is near. The signs point to the nearness of the kingdom. Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. Jesus had much to say about the signs of the times. That is, the signs that would point to his soon return to earth as the Messiah. Again in Luke 21, it says in verse 29, then he spoke to them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they are already budding, you see and know for yourselves that summer is now near. So you also, when you see these things happening, know that the kingdom of God is near. So much of what Jesus said about the signs of the times concerned Israel and Jerusalem itself. And then he said this, in verse 32, assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. Meaning when the signs begin to happen, then the generation that sees the signs will see the fulfillment of all things. But then Jesus finished his teaching with these words, if you like, a warning to the generation alive at that time. But take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this life, and that day come on you unexpectedly. For it will come as a snare on all those who dwell on the face of the whole earth. In other words, the signs are given for a reason. They point to the culmination of prophetic history that the Messiah is coming back to the earth that he created. But many people will not be aware of the signs because they're too busy with other things. They're distracted by the cares of this life. And then he says finally, in verse 36, watch therefore and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man, to stand before Jesus of Nazareth, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and the Judge of the whole earth.